When we first move to the cloud, or at least we have the idea to move to the cloud, we have this vision of everything being proper and in its place and aligned, and everything's just neat. And the reality is, what usually happens is it ends up in a tangled mess. IAM roles everywhere, assets across all regions. There's no consistent tagging process. It can become really frustrating and require a lot of rework to pull us back into something that's more akin to order. Now, AWS has a service that can help with that. And if you're at all familiar with ITIL concepts, you'll recognize the concept of a service catalog. And the idea here is that a IT organization, usually a centralized IT organization, can put together certain services that a end user base can go out and consume or subscribe to as easy as like a push button. They're all predefined and they're all standardized and they're all deployed in the same way. And so Service Catalog can help us do that. And it's going to appear on the exam, so you should probably know a little bit about it. The AWS Service Catalog is a framework for allowing administrators to create those predefined packages and allowing our users to consume them. And it has a lot of granular control over which products and portfolios our users can access. So we can set up groups that say this particular set of end users has access to these products and not these other products. And it makes use of adopted IAM roles so that the users don't need the underlying security required to deploy those solutions. And this is huge because what this means is that I don't have to manage the individual IAM rights and roles for individual users. I can deploy a service on Service Catalog, and then they can, via push button, deploy it and have access to it. And so I don't have to outfit that user with all those other roles that maybe they don't need in a day-to-day basis. And this is why I place Service Catalog more so in the security area than any other area, because this traditionally huge headache of access and rights management can be removed by using Service Catalog. Now, it really allows the end users to be self-sufficient, and it also allows us to uphold certain standards for deployment. The deployment templates are just CloudFormation templates. As administrators, we can version or remove products from the portfolio, but existing products that have already been deployed won't be shut down. Now, Service Catalog uses something called constraints to control how those products can get consumed. And there are 3 basic types. The first is a launch constraint. That's just the IAM role that the Service Catalog assumes when an end user tries to launch the product. And the reason we would use this is because without that launch constraint, the end user actually has to have those permissions to deploy the product. Maybe it's a LAMP server, for example. So by using a launch constraint, I can allow that end user to deploy a LAMP server without having to give that user a bunch of different permissions that maybe they won't need once that LAMP server is up and running. Next, there's the notification constraint. And this is pretty simple. It just says that this is the SNS topic that's going to receive notifications when something happens on that stack that gets deployed. And that's pretty straightforward. Then we have the template constraint. And this is very useful because it allows us to almost create kind of a quasi-wizard when a consumer or a user is trying to deploy our product. So we can ask them questions, and that kind of decides how we provision the product. For example, maybe we ask them a question of, are they going to be storing personally identifiable information on this data store or whatever? If the answer is yes, then we're going to implement encryption because our corporate policy says any PII data must be stored at rest with encryption. Another example is maybe we ask the user, is this for a development environment or a QA or a prod environment? And maybe if it's for a development environment, we just only allow certain instance sizes because anything larger would be just totally oversized and a waste of money. Now, service catalogs are also very useful in a multi-account environment. So in a multi-account environment, you can share a service portfolio with another account. And that master account, you can share the catalog, and then the recipient administrator in those other accounts can then import that portfolio. And then that portfolio gets kept in sync between the shared portfolio. So products, launch constraints, template constraints are all inherited from the shared portfolio. The recipient administrator can also add to that shared portfolio by creating a local portfolio. And they can add additional launch constraints or template constraints to maybe make the criteria for launching this more restrictive. But the cool thing is that the products always stay in sync. So if we come up with a new version of a deployable LAMP server and we deploy it in our shared portfolio, it automatically cascades down to those portfolios that have been imported in other accounts. Now, one thing that is not inherited is the IAM users and groups and roles. The recipient administrator must add users and groups and roles to the portfolio so that those users in that account can access it. Now, there's one important thing to note here, is that by default, if we just share a catalog and we import a catalog into the other account, the launch role, and that's the IAM role that launches the service on behalf of the user requesting it, is inherited from the shared portfolio. And so by default, it's going to try to launch those resources in that original master account. Now, as a local administrator, as an administrator of that sub-account, I can override that. I can create a local portfolio and then create a new launch constraint that uses a localized launch role. And also note that launch constraints are associated with a product in the portfolio and not at the portfolio level. So I can have an individual roles defined for each and every product.